First of all, welcome to Whalefest 2016. It's actually, yeah, the sixth annual, I should say. And I've got to do just a little bit of housekeeping here. We'd always like to thank our sponsors, of course, the Fisherman's Wharf Association and the Wecker Group and KRML Radio, KSBW, Central Coast ABC. We thank them and all of our other sponsors. This is a wonderful moment because coming up to this podium is someone who is world-renowned and has done so much for the ocean conservation movement, and we are very, very, very honored to have him here. Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, who you may know as Jay, is a scientist, he's a researcher, and he's the New York Times best-selling author of Blue Mind. He'll be doing the book signing, as I said, up until 3 o'clock today. He's going to speak for about 45 minutes. If you have some questions, please, at the end of Jay's talk, come on, file over here, and you can speak into the microphone. That way, the cameras can capture your question, and people will know why Jay is answering it, and what your question was, and you'll be on TV. Yay! Okay, and without further ado, please welcome Jay Nichols.
Thank you for everybody for coming out to Whalefest. It's an amazing event, and I'm really glad we got this little break in this El Nino winter weather. I'm watching the news this morning and watching that snow pile up on the East Coast, and just imagining what if all of our rain was in that, all of our water here coming out of the sky was in that icy form. How awesome that would be, right here on the coast, with many feet of snow. I'm going from here to Anchorage, Alaska, to the Alaska Marine Science Symposium, and I'm giving a keynote there. So I'm going to give you a version of that, but the timing there is longer, so it's going to be faster. So hold on, put on your seatbelts, hold on to your marbles or whatever you got. And I just want to start out by saying this is how you get in touch. So if you miss something, if you want a clarification, if you want to challenge anything that I'm saying or add to it, or got a great story, I love this. It's all about the conversation, as you can see there. Changing conversations for good is kind of the way I see what I do these days. And Twitter, you can tweet today, right now in the room, if that's something you do, and use the Blue Mind hashtag and join the conversation that we're starting here. So you've been given a blue marble. I just want to give a little shout out to the late, great David Bowie, who reminded me and many thousands of times through his lyrics and his singing that planet Earth is in fact blue. If you don't know what I'm referring to, look up that song, look up that lyric, and you'll come to it. If you don't have a blue marble, just raise your hand, and Peggy will make sure you get one, and she's going to be guarding the door and making sure everybody has a blue marble, because I use them as a prop and as a way to remind us of something that we kind of already know. And that's really what I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about, something that you already know, and maybe all I'll be doing is reminding you that you know it, or nudging you to put it into practice, or suggesting some things that you can say to other people, or helping us communicate our love for the ocean in a different way. This blue marble represents our home. The first photograph ever taken of our entire home, Earth, was named the blue marble by NASA scientists, NASA astronauts, and it's the most reproduced photograph ever. And I like to think about that and reflect on why would that photograph be the most reproduced photograph of all time. And I think it's because we love our home. I think that's the reason. It's a powerful, compelling photograph that we use over and over and over in so many different ways. And we love it. We love looking at it because it's our home. And if you look at our home from 1,000,000 miles away, which is about how we would look, that's how that marble represents about what we would look like from 1,000,000 miles away. You'll see that we're small and we're blue primarily because of the ocean. All of the water but really because of the ocean. So when we talk about the oceans, if you're paying attention, it's a lot of bad news, you know? Are you with me? Whether we're talking about sharks or dolphins or even whales or fisheries or plastic, every time I look up, every time I check my inbox, there's more bad news. And it sometimes feels like a tweak in the nose or a poke in the eye. Sometimes it feels like a fish banged across the face. So we use fear and we use shame, we use guilt as motivators to try to build a stronger environmental movement. We also use facts a lot. So the traditional toolbox of the ocean movement, the environmental movement in general, is fear, guilt, and a lot of information. Sometimes that just makes you feel overwhelmed, doesn't it? I know for me it does. It's kind of, it makes you feel bad. And you may not want to come to the next meeting. You may see those people coming down the street and cross to the other side of the street so that you don't need to talk to them, because you just can't handle more of that. So I think we need to expand our toolbox. I'm not saying that those facts and that fear and that guilt are useless, but we need a bigger toolbox, one that includes gratitude. I use Elmo as maybe the spokesperson for gratitude, the big Elmo hug. One that includes love, really talking as scientists, as serious people, about what we love and why we love it. In this case, that's the ocean. And building trust between ourselves and our so-called enemies. Because as trust falls apart, we really can't get much done. It just becomes a battle. It becomes a stalemate. And we're seeing that on so many levels right now around the world. Close to home, back in Washington, D.C., and around the world. When trust goes away, when there's no gratitude or love, it's really hard to solve the biggest problems, isn't it? So that's one of the things that Blue Marble reminds us of, is to say thank you. And your homework assignment is to hold on to that blue marble and pass it on to somebody that you want to say thank you to somewhere, some point in your life going forward. Put it in a safe place, maybe in your bag, your glove box, in your computer bag, or in a safe place at home, and pass it on to someone. So this is a question I like to ask people everywhere I go, is what's your water? So just take a moment and think of the first thing that came to mind. What's your water? Right? Shout it out. The bay, the Monterey Bay. What else? The Pacific Ocean, the Colorado River. Carmel River. Groundwater, the water that comes out of our tap, perhaps. Great Lakes. I was just up in Lake Superior, and what a great lake that is. Your body is water. What else? Your brain's water, tap water. So your water may, in fact, be the water that you use for hygiene and hydration, a very intimate, direct relationship. Now, we're pretty lucky around here. We turn a knob and that water comes out. But many people around the world have to go for a walk with a bucket to get that water. But it is a very, very simple, intimate relationship that allows us just to be alive, keeps us clean and healthy and hydrated. Your water may involve spending time checking out some of the other animals that need that water. And here on the Monterey Bay, we're so very fortunate to have a lot of that. Maybe up on the bow of the boat, I was out with Peggy and her team, and we're looking for whales, of course, but one of the highlights of the day was when the pod of common dolphins sort of surrounded us, and everybody moved to the bow, except for Captain Peggy. Of course, she stayed up on the bridge there, and everybody was happy. Everybody gets happy when the dolphins come. Maybe your water is more of a submergence, completely underwater. That's Brian Scarry, a photographer, eye to eye with that whale. It's a pretty amazing moment, one that really encapsulates the feeling of being under. Maybe standing in the water, doing something that we refer to as fishing, but if you've ever done sport fishing, you know it's a lot of standing around, thinking, maybe not even thinking about fish, just thinking about stuff, talking to the people you're with, getting to know them, falling more in love with the place and whoever you're with and yourself. And then maybe occasionally there's a fish involved. Maybe your water is a little bit more action-oriented. Maybe it's white water. Maybe it's learning to surf or getting out there with friends and teaching them to surf and having that fun time of standing up and falling down and then standing up again and paddling, falling down again in the water. When we're in the water with those we care about the most, something special happens, right? It's different than being on land when we're by the water, in the water, or underwater together, isn't it? It's better. And I love the land. Here we are right now on the land. But there's something about the water. And sometimes that relationship is facilitated through the so-called built environment. So a pier, a wharf, the architecture. This is a special pier in the UK that actually burned down last year and carried with it many, many generations of memories. People who visited Eastbourne Pier over many generations. And they will rebuild it. You can count on that. Just as if special places around here are destroyed, we bring them back because they carry so much nostalgia, so much memory. This is a water house on a reservoir in Louisville, Kentucky. Right? When I visited Louisville to talk about this conversation, I met some people who were hanging out there having their honeymoon. Right? Puts it in perspective, what we have here, that's their water in Louisville. That is literally their water supply. But it's also where they go to spend time together, to hold hands, maybe to smooch a little bit. Honeymoon by the reservoir in Louisville, right? Puts things in perspective. But that's where my parents live, in Fountain Hills, Arizona. They built the fountain before they built the town. It's the tallest continually operating fountain in the world. They call that a lake, but I think we may refer to it as a pond. And they take offense when I say, I'm going to go run around the pond. They said, you mean the lake? And this is Easter Sunday morning. That's where that group of people decided to gather, by the lake, watching the fountain, by the water. And that trail around the fountain is the most traveled trail in the whole town. And they've got a great trail system off into the desert, into the Sonoran Desert. So kind of weird, right? Kind of weird to have that be your body of water. But that's what they've got. We've got the Monterey Bay and the Pacific Ocean, and they've got the pond. We are offered views of the water by bridges. So a well-designed bridge is one where you can see the water. Have you ever been on a bridge where it gets you across the water, but you can't see the water? And you just think, man, who designed this thing? What were they thinking? Because I love going across bridges and looking, keep your eyes on the road, don't be unsafe, but look out and see that gorgeous view of the body of water. That special perspective from above it is really great. Your water may be something a little more playful, maybe the water that comes shooting out of the mouth of a giant frog head in a water park. It may be something very domestic, a rooftop pool in Singapore, perhaps. For these people who can afford that kind of scene, that's a pretty spectacular body of water. As artificial as it is, that's very relaxing and enjoyable. And for some people, it's much simpler. It's their bathtub. That's Jack Black, our friend. He loves water. He loves his bathtub. He got a nice bathtub, by the way, and loves to have his breakfast with his puppy and just think about what funny thing he's going to do next. Your water may be the water that comes out of the tap. And if you remember back in grade school when we didn't have bottled water, when we had these bubblers, and you stood in line and waited for your turn, and then when you finally got up there, you were the king or queen of the school. You were in charge of that water. You took your time. You drank that water. It tasted so good. You held the button in or turned the crank and just took your time. If you needed more, you get back online and slowly make your way up there. But something about that sip of cold water when you're a little thirsty is so good. Our water could be the water that's held in our food. Some organisms don't really drink water. They get all their water from the solid food that they eat or drink their food. I mean, there's other kinds of water as well. Around here, I've heard people say, my water is fog. So the water may be in various states. It may be in a gaseous state. Over on Lake Superior, where I was last week, they call it sea smoke. I said, wow, look at the fog. They said, no, we call it sea smoke. So, well, that's a beautiful name. I'm going to start using that over here when I see fog. Sometimes the water is in solid form. We call it ice, we call it snow. No less beautiful and compelling and awe-provoking. And sometimes our water is very small. Could even be just a drop of dew on a leaf in the morning. If you take the time to notice it, especially as we are going through that drought, noticing the water, noticing the small water as well as the big water, incredibly important. So when I think of my water, I think of my dad immediately. I think of the times that he facilitated us all being in the water, riding on his back and diving under the water. We call that the turtle ride. He was the turtle, I was the kid. And I love to do it, and I still do it with my daughters. They say, Dad, can we do the turtle ride thing? And they hold on my shoulders, and I dive down, we hold our breath, and we come back up. And I remember spending time in the Rocky Mountains by Deep Lake. That's Deep Lake there. And when I see that image, it takes me right back, literally. Wham, in 1 second, I'm back right now. I can feel the grass in my toes. I can taste the trout. I can hear the wolves howling at night. I remember how cold that lake was. We jumped in it every morning to wake ourselves up and bathe. And it was, glacially cold, but really, really amazing. At that age, by the way, I love turtles, and I unfortunately don't have a picture of myself with a turtle. So that's me on the left, and that's the turtle on the right. I used to catch snapping turtles in the Chesapeake Bay, and that's where I fell in love with turtles. And I can't really explain it, but I became kind of obsessed with turtles to the point where I see them everywhere. I see them in these patterns on the walls. I see them in the audience. Some of you are turtley. You already know who you are, so I won't embarrass you. I remember when I went home and I told my dad that I wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman. I wasn't going to be an engineer. I was going to be a turtle man, a turtle guy. And he thought he didn't understand. And maybe you've been there on some level. You told your parents that what you were passionate about, what you're going to do with your life, and they were just like, concerned. I mean, as a parent, I know exactly what they were feeling. They don't want you to be just off on the side of the road in the ditch of life. And being a turtle man to my dad was the path to that. But I told him I was going to do everything I could around turtles and for turtles. He didn't know what that meant, but he said, I'm with you and I'm supportive. I don't know what that means, but I'm there. And one of the first things we did is we put this transmitter on the back of the turtle. And I could spend, this is Whalefest, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about turtles, but I could spend the next week solid. If somebody would bring in water and food and a porta potty, we could just go for it and do Turtles 101 and 201. I love turtles. But I want to tell you this one little story. This is Adelita. We put a satellite transmitter on her back and released her into the ocean. She had spent the previous 10 years in captivity. And so that's an important point. She's a loggerhead turtle. This is the coast of Baja along the Pacific coast. And when you see her go into the water, watch as this loop comes around again. The tank that she lived in was about as wide as this stage, maybe a little bit less, and round. She swims a little bit, and then she pauses right about there, as if to say, where's the wall? There has been a wall about at this distance. Every time somebody put me back in the tank, and I swam this much, I would normally smash my head into a wall. So she pauses. And that's really interesting, but it's interesting biologically. It's also interesting metaphorically. I'm going to go with the metaphor right now. Think about the walls that you imagine that hold you in your tank, that in fact aren't even there. There are no walls there, but she pauses as if there are. And we pause or stop ourselves because we think there are walls, and in fact there aren't. They're available for us to swim through. But in our brains, our extremely powerful, huge, beautiful brains, we imagine stuff that stops us, that separates us from the world, from each other. We create these fake walls that divide us from ourselves, from what we should be doing, from those around us, from our environment. So Adelita, on the other side of that wall, decided, well, she's going to take off. And what she did was she swam home. Home just happened to be the other side of the planet in Japan. So she swam Took her 368 days to swim 7,000 miles across the biggest wilderness on our planet, the deepest water, the biggest blue space on the map. And we tracked her, and we started putting that data online. And people started tracking her with us. And this was 1996. And my advisors said, don't put your data online, young man. People will steal it. And I thought about it, and I wondered to myself, what would people do with stolen turtle data? Seriously, it sounds a little cheeky, right? But I wasn't being a wise guy. I was serious. Like, so if somebody's going to steal my data, why? It turns out the only things you could do with stolen turtle data are really good. Like, you could collaborate, or you could teach kids math, which is what some people did. And so we met colleagues around the world who were smarter than us, knew how to do things different that we didn't know how to do, and we started collaborating and sharing. Teachers used the data in their classroom, and it just threw the gates open to a global turtle social network, if you will. Back in 1996, nobody used that term, but we used the term network. And we started to build a network by sharing, by being more open. So I ask you the question again, to think, today, maybe think this week about what walls have you swum through? Right? What was on the other side? For me, it was breaking through some of the walls with regard to telling my parents I wanted to study turtles and not law. That was a wall. Breaking through the resistance of my advisors to share the data, to work with turtle hunters, to help save turtles. I've met some of my best friends all over the world. And next week I'll head to Baja to hang out with people like Juan de la Cruz Villejos, who grew up hunting, eating, and selling turtles, who's now a champion for saving turtles. And Jesus Lucero, who's leading Grupo Tortuguero, the turtle group, which is a network of organizations throughout northwestern Mexico who are bringing sea turtles back from the brink. He's a hero. He also was a turtle hunter, fisherman, and grew up eating turtle. So the so-called enemies of nature can sometimes become true champions and kind of unstoppable because they know so much. So I realized as a turtle guy that this was going off in a different direction. This was not marine biology. It was not the genetics and the satellite telemetry that I had been trained to do. So it was not wildlife ecology. It was something else. It was social science. And my advisor said, don't go there. Don't do that soft, fuzzy, hippy-dippy, Santa Cruz-y stuff, Stick to the hard science. And then I started hanging out with a different group of people who study the brain. And their science was harder than anything I'd ever seen. Technically rigorous, peer-reviewed publications, quantitative. The technology involved that was just really mind-blowing, no pun intended. They were beginning to understand our behavior, but really breaking it down to the neurological level. Now, there's a long way to go in the field of neuroscience. We're just at the tip of the iceberg, but it's a really exciting time because now we're able to open up the black box. Whereas before we had to understand behavior by looking at people that could stimulate somebody to do something and then see what they did, but you couldn't really see what was going on under the hood. You couldn't look inside. That's not entirely true. You could look inside, but it was after they were done using their brain. Right? You could compare their behavior in life to the damage, the injuries, the anomalies in their brain after they were done using it. In other words, after they were dead. And then make those comparisons. And that's how neuroscience went along for a very long time. And some pretty powerful insights about brain regions and that were deciphered by looking at injuries that people had and how their behavior may have changed after that injury. But nowadays we have the technology to open the box while the brain is still in use, to look at your behavior while you're using your brain, while you're doing things, while you're thinking things and feeling things. We're able to put people in the lab and stick their head in a brain scanner and ask really interesting questions like, what happens to your brain when you're making economic decisions, when you're listening to music, when you're looking at different colors? There's even a study of people drinking red wine in this brain scanning technology, right? chocolate, your brain on chocolate, your brain on wine, your brain on music, all of these things are happening. We're able to study the brain at rest and compare it to the brain in motion, or the brain doing high-level mathematical problems. We're able to study the neuroscience of love and understand it through its chemistry and its brain regions. Now, I find this, as a scientist, I find this super interesting. My wife doesn't. All right, so just as a side note, with Valentine's Day coming up, if you think serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin are really sexy and romantic, and your partner doesn't, just save it. Save it for another time. It can shut down the moment faster than anything. Right? That may be obvious to some of you, but maybe some of the guys might need that help. So oxytocin is a chemical that builds trust in all mammals, right? Wouldn't that be a good thing to understand better if we're trying to take better care of the ocean and the whales? Wouldn't it be good to harness oxytocin? Some people feel about neurochemistry the way I feel about turtles. And I guess I have to ask, does anybody in the room have an ocean tattoo? Yes. An animal? Is it an animal? Or a wave? What? A wave? Water? Ocean? Right, so anybody with an animal? Stingray. All right, so some people feel so compelled to put a turtle or a stingray or a whale or a shark or a wave or some demonstration of their love for the ocean. Some people feel the same way about neurochemistry. And surprise, some people they just love oxytocin so much. This chemical serotonin, some people love serotonin. So like there's the oxytocin crowd, just like there's the turtle crowd, there's the serotonin crowd, there's the whale crowd. Of course, there's the dopamine crowd. They go for, they put it on the wrist. Dopamine being, the chemical implicated in all kinds of addictive behaviors. The pain and pleasure feedback loop is based on dopamine, whether it's gambling or surfing or, any kind of drugs or extreme activity, dopamine is implicated. A colleague of mine who's a neuroscientist said, if we can harness dopamine as a force for good, wow, if you can become addicted to beach cleanups and whale watching and whale disentanglement, I have a few people that I know who are pretty addicted to that. That is great. That is great. If it feels good and it's helping the planet, wow, that's what we want to start thinking about. So if you go to the bookstore and you start looking around for books about the brain, apply to all these different topics, whether it's economics, whether it's marketing, whether it's music, whether it's the brain's ability to change itself, brain plasticity, meditation, even a book on neuroscience of magic, which may seem strange, but the early magicians were also neuroscientists, meaning that they understood our brains better than we did, allowing them to convince us they could do things that they really couldn't do. Therefore, we thought they were magicians. Illusionists is what they refer to themselves as. But they studied the human brain in order to fool us better, to make us think they could do stuff that they really couldn't do. Now, this is the cover of Scientific American magazine last year, The Science of Meditation. Look at that brain. What color is it? Blue. Interesting. Not a word about water in the whole article, in the whole magazine, but the brain glows blue while it's meditating. And a few years ago, about 4 years ago, if you looked at the internet and you looked for neuroscience applied to the world, you find all of these different topics. So the neuroscience of sports and music and art and various diseases, all kinds of health things, food, you name it. It's kind of hard to see that list. But what's not up there in those bubbles is nature or the forests or water or lakes or rivers or the ocean. Now that started to change, and it is changing, but these few short years ago, there was virtually nothing available. Neuroscience is experiencing this super growth phase. This is the golden age of neuroscience. Nobel Prizes in medicine being won by neuroscientists who are figuring things out. And this generation has an opportunity to take that knowledge and not just leave it in the journals, not just leave it in the hands of the doctors, but put it into practice to understand better how our brain responds to the world around us, to the things we love and the things we hate, how it influences our behavior, how it controls our behavior, and how might we take that understanding and put it to use to make the world better. And that's kind of what I've been interested in. That's this pivot from studying animal migration and trying to protect them, realizing that I needed to work with people, but then wanting to better understand, the engine of human behavior, the human brain, and starting to hang out with neuropsychologists. This generation is the first to have a decent, incomplete user's guide to the human brain. Now think about that. What are we going to do with it? Are we just going to use that knowledge to sell more stuff to people who don't need it? Are we going to use it to convince people to move in a different direction politically that may not be in our best interest? Or are we going to use that knowledge to fix what's broken in our societies and in nature? Well, it's going to be all of the above, I hope. I imagine Coca-Cola is still going to continue to use neuromarketing to sell sugar water. The Obama campaign had neuroscientists on its team to help with logos and language. And that's not going away. But we do need to build this movement to connect neuroscience to conservation. So the what, whys, and hows are really what Blue Mind is all about. How are we going to bring neuroscience closer to the conversation about the ocean, about our waterways, about our lakes and our rivers? Understanding that water is the source of life. It's the matrix of life. It's where we come from. It's where we go. And it's precious. There's a lot less water on Earth than you might imagine. That big marble, that's all the water, the salty stuff and the fresh water. That smaller one to the right, that's all the fresh water. And that teeny tiny one, kind of on Georgia, northern Georgia maybe, that's all the accessible fresh water. That's kind of mind-blowing. What if we mess it up? What if we blow it big time, as we seem to be doing in places all over the world, most notably Flint, Michigan, that we're hearing about this last week? When we talk about, if you go over to the Center for the Blue Economy, where some of my friends work and study, and we talk about what is the ocean worth, what is the blue space on our planet worth, you'll get a list that includes these things. The ocean gives us jobs, it gives us food, it gives us energy, it gives us oxygen, biodiversity. Of course, fresh water gives us hydration and hygiene. But to me, that list is dangerously incomplete. It misses a whole realm of what we get from healthy water that scientists generally don't like to talk about. And if you look in the reports, you won't find this other side of the coin even mentioned. Ecologists talk about trophic cascades. So if you replace the top predators, it changes the prey change the plant communities change the flow of the water. If you put the shark back on the reef, it adjusts the whole reef ecosystem in a good way. Right? That's a trophic cascade. And ecologists talk about ecosystem services, that list that I just showed you before there. But I want to talk about neurologic cascades and emotional services. That's the other side of the coin that we need to be digging into with the best available science, with the best communicators possible. So, you bring the river back to life, and then what happens? A mom and her daughter float down the river. Maybe they go fly fishing. And they fall more in love with the river. They fall more in love with each other. They fall more in love with themselves. And then what happens? They go home and they say, let's join the Save the River Club. Or, finding there is no Save the River Club, they say, let's start it. And then maybe they vote for the river. Maybe they donate to that organization. They get involved in protecting what they love, what brought them together. That's the neurologic cascade, that life-changing thing that we could all tell that story. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be sitting in this room right now if we hadn't fallen in love with our water at some point, with those whales, with those turtles, in my case. So I want to add to that list the cognitive, emotional, psychological, social, and even spiritual benefits that we derive by being near, in, on, and underwater. Because we can qualify this, but we can also increasingly quantify it. And so my challenge to my colleagues, economists at the Center for the Blue Economy, has been, do not ever speak or write without including This. Because every time you put out a report or make a presentation and you leave it out, you are saying it doesn't exist. Whether you realize it or not, by leaving it out, you are saying it doesn't exist. And it does. And there's massive value to the health of our little blue marble. This conversation, I call it neuroconservation. Sort of a mashup of neuropsychology and conservation biology. If you could put it in a pill, somebody would. But fortunately, you can't. Nature gives us all of this. Nature is medicine. Our ocean, our bay is medicine. It pulls the stress out of us. We need that because our lives on land are becoming more and more connected and more chaotic. And you know what I'm talking about. I don't need to hammer on that too much. We all wish we could go to the doctor and have this procedure done. Please take the monkey mind out of my head. I can't handle it anymore. On the extreme level, post-traumatic stress, that's extreme red mind. We all deal with it in some way or another, that chronic stress. Now, stress is important. It saves our lives. It keeps us in motion. It helps us get across the finish line to the deadline. So little short bursts of stress are just part of how we work well when everything's working. But chronic social stress breaks us down. It ruins us. It makes you sick. And then here we come, the champions of the environment, and we load on the fear and the guilt and too much information. We add to the red mind of those we love, of those we say we care about. So I propose this idea that I call blue mind, which is a very, very ancient idea. It goes way back thousands of years. So the first people, everywhere you go, you find that the first people understood this. So I'm not saying anything new. I'm just putting it in maybe different words. Artists throughout history have depicted this feeling elegantly. People lined up to stand in front of paintings like this one. They paid money just to stand there and see this rendition of the ocean. Abstract artists like my late brother-in-law, John Imber, painted the ocean right up until his death. As his body was failing because of ALS, he continued to paint. And this was one of his last paintings before he passed away last year of the Maine coast. Rand Ortner paints these murals that are the size of those walls around us. He puts 5 inches of paint on the canvas, and they look like the surface of the ocean. They're fantastic. Poets, Pablo Neruda, necesito de mar porque me enseña. I need to see because it teaches me. Muhammad Ali, referring to spirituality in water. There are all kinds of waters and there are all kinds of religions. Mary Oliver, the imagination that we find in water. You go to the water to think more creatively. Jim Harrison, a great novelist, I love his stuff, writes a lot about rivers and the importance of rivers to just being a strong, creative person. Maya Angelou, just powerful words. Water as metaphor, but also as a literal source of inspiration. Of course, these ancient bits of philosophy that stick and get repeated over and over and over again because they make good sense. Now, the cover of the New Yorker, this is so blue mind, the multi-generational fascination with the water. You ever been one of those people, where you look over and the other generations are doing what you're doing, enjoying the water? Corona, they sold, a lot of, I'm going to say bad beer, on the heels of Blue Mind. They used the ocean to market, mediocre beer in a clear bottle. Remember the Nestea plunge? There was a period in my life where I only entered the water backwards because of the marketing that Nestea did, the Nestea plunge. You smile and you fall backwards into the water. The end of Shawshank Redemption, Morgan Freeman, the last line of the film. It's all about the water. It pulled him through. The middle of Titanic, that moment, I'm the king of the world. Felt so good. So brought his honey back up there. And then they lived happily ever after, raised a family, and they fell so deeply in love. It was great. That movie, remember that one? From Here to Eternity? Now imagine that film, that scandalous, memorable scene on the beach without the water. It'd be super duper weird. rolling around in the dirt in your underwear, kissing and making out. Doesn't make sense. Add the water back, it's beautiful. Modesto, California, the archway on the way in, same designers who made the Golden Gate Bridge. Water, health, contentment, health. Water, wealth, contentment, health. Contentment, another word for happiness. 100 years ago, they knew that was all connected. The beach down in Del Mar, summer 2003, we did a walk from Oregon to Mexico down the coast. Stopped there to see how much they were asking for that house. 6.3 million, 800 square foot bungalow with a carport, right, on the beach. 6.3 million. Take a step back and look nationally. We pay a huge premium for water view property, huge premium. Nationally, for all waterways, double. There in Del Mar, California, 1,000% premium between the front row and the second row. To average 10 million in the front row, average 1 million in the second row. 1,000% premium. If you ask people why, what are you paying 1,000% premium for? The premium being the single biggest financial transaction of their life, the premium, they'll tell you, I don't know. I'm not sure. I like it. It feels good. I want to see the water. A little fuzzy on the reasoning behind the single biggest financial decision in their lives. So this is a conversation about all of our water, not just the oceans, not just the coast, not just the whales, but all the waterways and the organisms in them. So it's an inland and a coastal conversation. Places like Pittsburgh are bringing their rivers back and transforming the community from one that turned its back on the rivers to one that embraces the rivers. Groups like WaterStep are taking water to places where they need it. And they're changing communities. Not just giving people drinking water, but giving them smiles and happiness and joy and play that water facilitates. Because water really is medicine. And again, this is not a new idea, but now we have this cool insight into what that really means. Thousands of years ago, in this book called the Bible, there's a reference to blue mine in the 23rd Psalm. When, pardon my French, when the shit's hitting the fan and you're walking through the valley of evil, what do you want? You want a meadow, a green pasture? Maybe some water to lay down by. That'll feel good, right? There it is in the 23rd Psalm. Reminders, nudges of something we've always known, that our water gives us more than oxygen, jobs, and seafood. The late Oliver Sacks wrote that water gave him his best ideas. He got in the water and his brain worked better. And he turned those great ideas into breakthrough concepts in neurology and best-selling books about the human brain. Naoki Higashida, autistic kid, best-selling book, felt best in the water. He felt most free, felt most like us, felt normal. All the noise went away. And we all experience something along that spectrum in our lives. For him, it was more extreme. For some of us, it's milder. Martin Pollock served in the Middle East, came home with neither of his legs and only one of his arms. His plan was to spend the rest of his life in a pub, drinking beer with his mates, maybe becoming, as in his words, a blob on a stool. But he got over here to our coast, got on a surfboard, learned to surf, and never looked back. Now he's surfing around the world with some of the best surfers in the world. He's been to Kauai to surf with Laird Hamilton, and he's an ambassador for surfing, for positivity, but most importantly for the ocean. We have a drug problem in our country that is showing up in surprising places everywhere I go. I was just up on Lake Superior, front of the newspaper. This is last week. Meth lab, right on the banks of Lake Superior. And I know for a fact that lab was polluting the river, and that river was going into the lake. Not only is it polluting rivers, it's polluting healthy minds and bodies, destroying communities. We do know through experience that one way to get yourself off of drugs and other kinds of addictions is to get outside, to become addicted to things like surfing and paddling and diving and recreation and hiking. Programs like this one in Hawaii take youth at risk on ocean expeditions. Programs like this one in Minnesota and Wisconsin take youth at risk and they go snorkeling in these really cold rivers. Programs like this one take kids out to the rivers of Oregon. That's Chad Brown. He runs Soul River out of Portland, Oregon. People are realizing that simply floating in water calms them, soothes their brain, helps them work through things. And here's a little thing you may not know. You know Steph Curry, that basketball player up the road? He floats in float tanks in San Francisco to calm his mind, to work through stuff. If you look on ESPN.com, you'll find a video of him doing this. This is a friend who wrote a book about treating anorexia, her self-medicating basically by floating, by spending time in water. So if you're interested in the science, and I'm going to go burning through, coming around the corner here to finish this up. I think about, if I take 5 minutes, are we going to be okay? You're okay. Okay. If you're really interested in the science, please check out Matt White at the University of Exeter Medical School. That's a great place to start. Lots of peer-reviewed studies. And I've just carved through a lot of this kind of in a very superficial way. It's very, very important that we protect access to our waterways. And I'll just say a few words about access. If you get to the water and it's like that, you don't have access to your blue mind. Right? An oil spill doesn't just take away jobs. It doesn't just mess with the ecology. It doesn't just hurt animals. It takes away the number one source of stress reduction in a community. And then what does that mean? That stress stays in us. And then what does that mean? Bad things. What if you go to the beach and instead of just enjoying it, you spend the day doing beach cleanups? That can feel good, but if you're my daughters, you finally say to their dad, me, every time you take me to the beach, Dad, we clean up other people's crap. Why? Can't we just go play? That was a wake-up call. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, let me do that. I forgot. We were always doing these beach cleanups with my little girls. If you try to go to the beach and there's a gate and it's locked and somebody says, no, you can't, I own it, but they really don't. We Californians get a little upset about that. We try to get that gate open so that our public waters and coasts are available. Back in the day, if the color of your skin was not the right one, you didn't get in the water. If you were my friend Harvey Welch in Carbondale, Illinois, you didn't even learn to swim. But he grew up and became the head of Parks and Rec in Carbondale, and now he's building the first public swimming pool in that community's history. Some people suffer far away from the ocean. All they want to do is get back and stand there. This is Jarmila, who suffered from Alzheimer's. All she wanted to do is see the ocean one more time. We need to break through these walls and give access to people. Groups like the Wahine Project, taking kids who have never gotten in the ocean. And guess what they're doing? They're getting in. They're learning to surf, breaking through those walls. My friend Carlos in Mozambique, the first Mozambican dive master. He was told growing up that his people don't get in the water. It's dangerous. He decided he wanted to learn to dive and become a dive master. So this next generation is sometimes going to the beach, sometimes it's clean. They have access. Nobody's stopping them. But then they have their heads down in these devices. And they're not really there. And I talk to them. I say, why don't you get in the water? And they say, well, my phone will get wet. So why don't you leave your phone on the towel? I say, somebody will steal it. They're tethered to the earth, to the ground, by these devices. I think we need to put some baby turtles in their hands, take those smartphones away, substitute in the turtles. So what do we get from the water? I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, little list. We get awe. We get wonder. And that science of wonder and awe is pretty fascinating if you dig into it. We find awe and wonder in our water. It switches us from a me perspective to a we perspective. That's what the psychologists tell us. Awe does that. It occurs in a particular part of our brain, helps us build compassion, builds empathy and trust. Wow, water can do all of that. Yeah, it can. It relaxes us, and that's important because stress, in fact, is killing us. Relaxation is medicine. Simply looking at an aquarium, even a fish bowl, will reduce your heart rate and your breathing rate. The Monterey Bay Aquarium is medicine. The Monterey Bay is awesome medicine. Use that language. It boosts our creativity, and my friend Pharrell Williams told me, that's where I first discovered my love for music, through the motion of water. When I tell kids that, it gets their attention. What is the ocean good for? Among many other things, it gives you creativity and solitude. What is life without a bit of solitude? Well, we're finding out what life is like without solitude. It's distracted. What about a life without privacy? Water is great for facilitating privacy and solitude. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, romance, nostalgia, the feeling of hope, even a fountain in a park. Reconciliation, help us reconnect with each other. And of course, it builds resilience. One last little story, and then I'll take questions outside while I'm signing books. This is somebody mentioned the Colorado River. This is the Colorado River. I know it doesn't look like a river, it looks like a beach. And then one day, the water flowed, and everybody got in. And you know what happened? Men and women introduced their kids to their river for the first time. And they fell in love with each other, with their place. Moms and dads got to say, this is my river. This is the river I grew up with. It's been dry, but the water's back. So my childhood hero taught me that people protect what they love. And I've taken that concept very seriously. As a scientist, I've gone deeper into that statement than most. As a scientist, I'm not afraid to use the L word, standing at a podium, saying into a microphone. And sometimes, in certain rooms, when I say the word love, I can see all the eyeballs rolling. I can actually hear them. And if you've ever heard a room full of eyeballs rolling, it can throw you off. It can really freak you out. It's not a good sound. But that's my challenge to you, is to take your blue marble, have it remind you of something that may have popped into your head today, maybe a bunch of things. But pass it on to somebody you want to say thank you to, because gratitude, love, and trust are required. They're not optional. We're never going to have the funds we think we need to fix everything that's broken. So we have to add tools to our toolbox. We need to be clever. We need to be creative. We need to say thank you and please. We need to be polite to each other. We need to get in the water. We need to get out on the water. Invite somebody. The next time you're going to go get wet, invite somebody who never has ever touched our ocean. Invite 5 people. Do it safely, please. It's dangerous out there at times. But get in the water, because it's the only way we're going to fall in love. So that's the real message I want to share. For me, it was turtles that opened that door. And for some people, it's whales. For some people, it's stingrays and manta rays, and so on and so forth. Remember that. Don't be shy about speaking about how completely head over heels in love you are. Because the people who are saving sea turtles are, in fact, the turtle freaks, the turtle huggers, the people who fly their freak flag really high. They're unstoppable. You can take away their funding. They don't stop. You know, the people who are saving the whales, it's always been this way. The unstoppable people that are just completely passionate and head over heels in love. Don't be shy about that. I know many of you are not shy about that at all. Continue to be passionate. Talk about it. Share that. As scientists, talk about the neuroscience of love. I'll give you the citations if you need me to cover your butt on that. That's no problem. So thank you for spending this time together. And,